Hello and welcome to the newest episode of the Great Rebel Warriors of Bharat monthly series. This promises to be a very exciting one because we're going to focus on the Fituri of Alluri Sitaram Raju. Alongside, we are also going to focus on the progress made by the Santhal Hole of 1855 for the month of August that year. And we're also going to look at who are the people to whom we had to say goodbye in the month of August over the course of the freedom struggle. All of this based on this book. So let's get cracking. 18th of August is a very important day in India to be making a lot of noise over the Taihoku air crash of 1945, which never happened in the first place. And in course of all this unnecessary brouhaha, we have been forgetting to remember Helen Lepcha, also known as Sabitri Devi. Helen was a freedom fighter from the Lepcha community, and she made great contributions fighting against the British on horseback, ditching bullets and arrest warrants with miraculous and admirable qualities of bravery and courage. Post-independence also, she remained very active, though this time her enemies were different. She had to fight social evils like parda, untouchability, illiteracy and casteism, and until her last breath on 18th August 1980, she remained an active member of various associations of the Lepchas and the Sherpas, and also the Kushiang Mandal and Anjuman Islamia. 29 August 1931, Haipou Jadonang, the founder of the Hiraka movement, was hanged until death on the banks of the Nambul River behind the Imphal jail under false charges of murder. Jadonang was an ascetic from the Zeliangrong family of tribes, Zeme, Lingmai, Rongmei Kabui, and Hiraka was the movement that he founded with a twofold intention. One, to help these Zeliangrongs reconnect with their primordial religion as against getting converted to Christianity, and second, to drive out the British, who they found to be unnecessarily interfering with their socio-economic affairs. But this was obviously not acceptable to the British. They did sense that this guy was up to some nuisance and might even lead to their ouster from the region. And at that time, Manipur was a princely state and was very much under the influence of the British Raj. So, Jadonong's Hiraka posed a very serious threat. Yes, the name is Jadonong. Haipou is the word, Zeliang word for priest. So when his cousin and disciple Gaidenyu took over, she was actually known as Haipou Gaidenyu. Haipou is the gender equivalent feminine for Haipou, meaning priestess. And later on, she was given the title of Rani by Jawaharlal Nehru in his attempt to get her freed from the lifelong imprisonment that she had been sentenced to. So that's the importance of 29 August in our history. After the Santhal Hole broke out on the 13th of June 1855 and met with considerable success in the month of July, the British were worried. Of course, they fought back, trying to suppress it, but it was not as per their expectations. Their success was not as per their own expectations. And so in early August, A.C. Birwell, the commissioner of Nadia, was appointed as a special commissioner to ensure the suppression of this movement, this rebellion. And Birwell, in his attempt to do so, issued a proclamation asking all Santhals to surrender. And he assured that except for the leaders, everyone else would be pardoned. In a meeting conveyed by Sidho Murmu, one of the four Murmu brothers who were leading this movement, this rebellion, this resolution, this proclamation was rejected. And after that, 30,000 Santhals, which included men, women and children, started marching towards Calcutta to submit their petition to the then Governor General, Lord Dalhousie. And in their march, as they progressed through their march, they brought down every bit of government machinery, starting from post, telegraph and railways, and they hunted down and killed every Mahajan in sight. Obviously, this was their grievance, unaddressed grievance that was speaking and not their violent nature. So as their march progressed, and it started becoming increasingly evident that getting them to surrender and suppress the whole was going to be difficult. The British became worried and started resorting to alternate ways of capturing the leaders. In short, they were looking for someone amongst the Santhals who would betray the Murmu brothers. They found favor in Bhagna, a close aide of the brothers. On the 19th of August, on the pretext of applying medicines to the wounds on Sidhu's body, Bhagna instead tied him up in cords and then delivered him to Major Shakberg's camp at Gutrai, a few miles away from Bhagalpur. Sidhu was then brought to Bhagalpur proper, given a trial, and executed publicly at Burhat. And that's how another betrayal helped the British win. Before going into the details of the Fituri of Alluri Sitaram Raju, it is appreciable that we take some effort to understand the prevailing conditions of that time and the reasons that led to the Fituri. Helps us understand and admire the man and the movement so much more better. Let's get going. We understand that the Fituri was between the Koya tribes versus the British. But in 1839, when the first Fituri broke out, it was between the Zamindars or the Muttadars as they were known in this region, Godavari Agency, and the British administration. Yes, the Koyas came in later. Now, why did the Muttadars or the Zamindars fight against the administration? Very simply because the East India Company, as the administration was at that time, had sought to modify the Muttadari system established by the Mughals by introducing Munasabdars. They were now going to rule over the Muttadars, and so these Muttadars were facing loss of their independence and privileges. Obviously, they were going to protest, and so the Fituri had started. Or rather, we should say that the seeds of the Fituri were sown in 1839. The Koya tribes came in a little later, especially after the Madras Forest Act of 1882, which prohibited them from accessing the forest lands for practicing their shifting cultivation and also denied them the right to the forest produce. Now, deprived of food and livelihood, they were forced to turn into laborers. And mostly and sadly, they ended up being unpaid and overused laborers. For one thing, the British administration, by then they had come under the agency, actually had come under the British Empire thanks to the mutiny of 1857 and the taking over of the subcontinent by the British Crown. So in 1882, after the Madras Act was brought in effect and the Koya tribes were forced to become laborers, they started facing injustice in the form of not getting paid for their work or having to work overtime and still being taxed for it. For instance, there was this case of Yendu Pandal, who had to turn into a contractor. He was given an advance of 100 rupees. 100 rupees is a lot of time at that time. He was given an advance of 100 rupees and asked to oversee the construction of a road. And when the construction was completed, Pandal went to his British masters and asked for the rest of the amount. The British masters refused to give him. Instead, they found fault with his work and also asked him to return the advance that was given to him. And when he refused to do that, he was badly beaten up. So these sort of situations and incidents started becoming increasingly common. And at the same time, Alluri Sitaram Raju had turned into an ascetic and was wandering around, and even though his primary interest lay in spiritual matters, the sad state of affairs prevailing in the society at that time had not missed his observations. He was very saddened, deeply grieved at the kind of injustice meted out to the Koya tribes and badly wanted to help. There was also a nationalist in him. So the kind of movements that were prevalent at that time, be it the revolutionary ones or the Gandhian side of actions, non-action rather, were under his consideration. He admired both and personally felt that it was a combination of both that was going to be beneficial for the Koya youths. His wanderings had thankfully led him to Chittagong, Calcutta, which was the hotbed of revolutionaries in the early 1920s, or rather the early part of the 20th century, thanks to the partition of Bengal. And from there, he was deeply influenced, carried a lot of ideas of the secret societies that were active at that time. And these secret societies were deeply impressed by the revolutions in France, by the Bolsheviks and the Irish. And they hoped to replicate the results in India using the same methods. Sitaram Raju got back to the Godavari agency and decided that something needs to be done along the same lines. He did have admiration for the Gandhian philosophy as well, but he found that while the Congress Pracharaks had done a good job of spreading word about the movement amongst the farmers, the Koya tribes, they were unable to understand the actual depth of the situation. They were unable to grasp the grievance of the people. And the people were also unable to understand why they should align with this movement, because their grievances were not getting addressed at all. So there was a disconnect. And Sitaram Raju could see that if this was left unaddressed, there was doom and gloom in store. At the same time, the non-cooperation movement launched in 1921 was abruptly called off in March 1922 after the Chauri Chaura incident. So now the entire Gandhian movement was left rudderless. People had no idea how they were going to protest. And Sitaram Raju couldn't just simply sit there watching the Koya tribes face injustice that was increasing exponentially and do nothing. He took matters in his own hands and started preaching civil disobedience. This had two effects. One, people started getting confidence that there was indeed one leader at least to whom they could go to for help and guidance. Second, he came under the radar of the police, of the administration. But that was not his main concern. He was elated by the fact that people, the Koya tribes, were uniting and were beginning to get ready for a Fituri. That's when Gantam and Malu, two youths from the Gudam Mutta, approached Sitaram Raju. Their Muttadar, Veerayya Dora, had already been imprisoned earlier that year for protesting against the British. You see, Veerayya Dora's ancestors were the first ones to lose their independence and privilege to the Munasabdars as early as in 1839. And ever since, the descendants of those Muttadars had been protesting, and as a result, they were imprisoned, released, then re-imprisoned and released, and the cycle continued with the police. So Veerayya Dora was actually just in one of his cycles of going to prison and coming out. In 1922, when Gantam and Malu met Sitaram Raju, he was already in prison, and his trial was set for the 24th of August that year. Raju decided this was a wonderful time and context to launch the Fituri, and he decided that they would have a three-pronged approach. They would start the Fituri on the 22nd, and for the next 3 consecutive days, they would be attacking 3 different police stations, including the one in which Veerayya Dora was imprisoned. So, the places were chosen, and they were Krishnadevapeta, Chintapalli, and Rajavogomangi. Before the attack, Sitaram Raju sent out letters to these police stations notifying them that he was going to come on that particular date armed with 500 Koya youths, and to literally rub salt in their wounds. And to spice up the matter, he dusted those letters with chili powder. Truly, he was displaying the spirit of catch me if you can, and I dare you to do that. Well, the Fituri was launched on the 22nd of August quite successfully. At each of these 3 places, Veerayya Dora was released, rather he was just freed off because the Koya youths had taken over the police stations. And from every station that they attacked, they took away ammunition and police uniforms, so that at the end of the 3-day campaign, they had amassed 2,500 rounds of ammunition, 26 muskets, and several sets of police uniforms. All of these were going to be used in the Fituri that was going to last for a couple of more years. Veeranya Dora, who was freed, was not grateful for his freedom, and neither did he extend any kind of support to Sitaram Raju. In fact, he continued in his old ways, went back to his village for a few days, then started protesting, and very soon he found himself back in jail again. But when it came to Sitaram Raju, this whole campaign elevated him to the status of a savior, and soon more and more koya youths started joining him in the Fituri, and that's how the movement grew. To know more about how the Fituri progressed and what were the challenges and excitement going on during those 2 intense years, please check out the remaining videos in this playlist, and do subscribe for the future episodes, especially the ones coming up in September, because they promise unheard stories of rebellion from the indigenous communities in the south of India. I hope you enjoyed this episode and you will stay tuned for the new ones to come. Till then, see you, take care.